We don't want it recording now.
Okay, you can shut the recording and we'll.
Well, where is this? It doesn't show where it's recording.
Okay. All right, Annette, you're on.
Okay, welcome everyone to our program this evening, which is a three-part series on the Ritchie Boys. And we are pleased to have Standera as our guest speaker. Standera has a BA degree in economics from Lehman College in the Bronx of New York. He had a 38-year career in the electric supply industry with Graybar Electric Company. Stan presently volunteers with several Raleigh organizations, including OLLI at NC State University as an instructor, a member of the programming committee, and previously on the advisory council and membership committee. Stan is very active at Temple Beth Hor, and he serves on the board of trustees, the development committee, and is chair of the adult education committee. Please, for this evening's program, keep yourself muted. And if you have any questions, place them in the chat box, which we will monitor at the end. Now I'm pleased to present Stan as our guest speaker.
Okay.
All right, I'm going
Thank
to
you.
do a sharing.
Let me get my tech expert on this.
Hang on. Share the sound first. Okay, just hang on. But I need to just move this away. All right, slideshow.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the presentation on the Ritchie Boys. This is put on by the Adult Education Committee. I'm going to run the program tonight and next week, and Larry is going to do it the third week, December 1st, 8th, and 15th. Okay, so before I get into this, I just want to give you some interesting facts about the Ritchie Boys. There were 15,200 soldiers who trained at Camp Ritchie. And it's actually Fort Ritchie in Maryland, but it got known as Camp Ritchie. 2,200 of these soldiers were Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria. And what I am going to do in the next 2 weeks is focus on 3 of those boys. There's been a post-war report and found that 60% of all creditable intelligence gathered in Europe came from the Ritchie Boys. And while I'm not going to spend any time on this, I just want you to see 3 very, very famous people that trained and became Ritchie Boys. David Rockefeller, the banker and CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank. J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, and Archibald Roosevelt, who really wasn't famous by himself, but he was the grandson of President Teddy Roosevelt. So before we kick this off, this is a trailer for the movie Ritchie Boys. It's a real short video. Let's watch it.
I wanted a weapon. I wanted to kill Nazis, not with a syringe.
I felt I had to get back and do what I could.
I'm 21 years old, kid. I'm a smart kid, but I'm still a kid.
Well, that was a circus, but a good circus, you know, fun.
And when I left, she said to me, look, I don't want you to be killed in this war. And she put a medal around my neck, which I still have.
So I have not seen this movie, but I definitely will make it a point to see the movie. And let's move on. I want one more video before I get into my program, because this is a great introduction to my program right here. Yeah.
Memorial Day weekend is about much more than just a day off. It is set aside to honor the men and women who died while serving their country. Today, a World War II survivor is sharing a story that sounds like it could be turned into a movie. Local 4's Sandra Ali introduces us to the Ritchie Boys, their mission, and their memories of wartime heroes.
He's a member of an elite group, German-born Jews who fled their homeland, came to the United States, and then joined the U.S. Army. They're known as the Ritchie Boys, and one of them, 99-year-old Guy Stern, is one of them who's still around to share his story.
Guy Stern is a few months shy of celebrating his 100th birthday, with no plans of slowing down anytime soon. Stern, along with a group of young men, mostly German Jews, played a key role in helping allies win World War II. They trained at a top-secret military intelligence center in Camp Ritchie, Maryland.
What we did should receive some acknowledgement. There is a slander frequently spread about Jews, that they are not ready to go to combat. And we did. And the whole group of us did.
For decades, the Ritchie Boys didn't discuss what they did during the war, until now. Stern details some of the events of his remarkable life, including his escape from Nazi Germany in a recent memoir titled Invisible Ink.
We're constantly being shot at out of fortifications right on top of those cliffs. I looked where those German soldiers were safely ensconced, and I said to myself, it can't be done.
Stern says the Ritchie Boys don't like being called heroes. They were soldiers doing their job. They had a war to fight, he says, and they did it.
The term hero belongs to the infantry in those days and the Rangers. I had to march the German soldiers to the evacuation point where they went again on trucks, were put on ships, and mostly shipped to England and the United States.
While some memories have faded through the years, others have stayed with him. While Stern got out, his parents, younger brother, and sister had been forced from their home, deported, and later killed. Losing his family haunts him to this day.
When I got confirmation that all my family had been deported to Poland and had perished there, it certainly wakes me up.
So it still haunts you. Time doesn't heal, right?
No, not in that sense.
Guy Stern says the remaining Ritchie Boys all still keep in touch. In fact, he says they love to share old stories about a piece of American history finally being shared. Back to you.
All right. So the reason I chose that video to kick off is because this is one of the guys that I'm talking about. So to summarize what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks, tonight, and before I even do it, I want you to understand this is 100% a true story. If you remember some TV shows we've watched in the past, they would say, this is a true story, but the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Well, no names have been changed tonight. Everything I'm going to tell you happened. I'm going to start with the childhood of the three Ritchie boys, innocence prior to the Nazis taking over. And then, of course, the world changes when Hitler comes to power. There's despair. They get separated from their family. I'm going to talk about a new beginning in the United States and how they get to Camp Ritchie and the training that takes place. Next week, we're going to go beyond that story. And let's move to Guy Stern. So I think you saw a couple of these photos in the video we watched. On the left, that's Guy's family. So Gunther Stern, not Guy Stern, Gunther Stern, was born in 1922 in the quaint town of Hildesheim in northern Germany. The town was situated by the Innerst River and surrounded by rolling hills and farms. The population of the town was approximately 65,000 people, with approximately 1,000 Jews. The Jews first came to Hildesheim in the 17th century. They built a synagogue there in 1849. The Christians and the Jews lived side by side without any conflict whatsoever. Gunther is the oldest of 3 children of Julius and Hedwig. They owned a small fabric store. Gunther's education began in a one-room Jewish school. At age 10, in 1932, he attended public school with 2 other Jews in his class. The following year, 1933, is when Hitler came to power. After only 4 months, Hitler declared a boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. Julius lost his Gentile customers who were afraid to enter his shop. Gunther soon learned that his friends eventually stopped speaking to him. He was banned from the local swimming pool and kicked off his soccer team. The older teachers, who were empathetic to the Jewish students, were replaced by teachers who preached the Nazi propaganda. All references to Jewish accomplishments were removed from their textbooks. Can you imagine a textbook with just pages missing because they couldn't tell the story about Jews? The family decided in 1937 that it was time to leave Germany. Due to the many restrictions, the whole family was not able to leave at the same time. They were able to get an affidavit from Hedwig's brother, Bruno Silberberg, who lived in St. Louis, that he could only vouch for one person. Since Gunther was the oldest, he was selected to go to America. The family was absolutely devastated that they had to separate. Gunther, at 15 years old, never even traveled outside of Germany. Julius made arrangements with friends in Hamburg, which was about 100 miles away, to put them up for a few days. They met with a Jewish organization in Hanover who was in contact with the New York agency, German Jewish Children's Aid. They met with the US Vice Consul General, where his uncle's affidavit was approved. The Nazis made sure to inspect the baggage of all departing Jewish Germans to make sure that what they were taking was within the approved Nazi amount. One of Gunther's former friends, his father, happened to be the inspector. He put the official seal on Gunther's baggage without looking inside. They were given a departure date in November 1937. On the day of departure, Julius and Hedwig took Gunther to Hamburg. It was a gut-wrenching goodbye. His parents told him that as soon as he was able, he needed to get the rest of the family out of Germany. His father told him to remember that the SS Hamburg is a German flagship. He needs to remain cautious while on the ship. He will not be safe until he puts his feet down in the United States. There were no incidents on the voyage to America. In fact, Gunther had a very good time on the voyage, playing with other Jewish refugee boys. He even had his first taste of Coca-Cola that an American gentleman gave him. When the ship docked in New York, it was determined that Gunther was fluent enough in English to make the trip to St. Louis by himself. He took a train to Chicago, where a representative from the agency gave him a short tour of Chicago and put him on the train to St. Louis. When Gunther arrived in St. Louis, he was met by his Aunt Ethel and Uncle Melvin. His Uncle Benno was working, so Gunther did not meet him until that evening. Gunther started attending school just a few days after arrival. He was a very good student and mingled well with classmates. He even had his first girlfriend, Ida Mae Silberberg, who thought the name Gunther sounded too German. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Ida Mae Schwartzberg. But she thought his name sounded too German. And from that day forward, Gunther Stern became Guy Stern. And let's watch a video of Guy Stern. And I want you to focus on the way he describes how his friends and neighbors changed.
Thank you, George. When I speak tonight, can you all hear me? When I speak tonight, it is not simply my adventures, but all those who were side by side with me from all units, including intelligence. So I'd like to begin this evening by asking how many of you here are fellow veterans? I congratulate you. What I have to tell you is connected with my past. And I give you just a few more words that George beautifully summarized about my fate prior to the Nazis, born in a medium-sized town in northern Germany, where we had the illusion that there was no more ethnic struggle, no more division, and we lived in that belief and were strengthened by the experience that we had in this beautiful medium-sized town in Germany, and that turned out to be a delusion, because I'll start out by telling you a Chinese parable, since you wanted me, George, to bring in a little intellectual enlightenment as well, as far as I'm able to. So there's an old Chinese tale. There's a village surrounded by a huge forest, and to get to the next big town, you had to traverse that forest, and it was rumored that a very bad ogre was inhabiting that, and it was very dangerous. So one day, a man from the village had urgent business in the next town. It probably was to pick up some prescription, and so he knew he would have to cross this wood very late at night. So he went to his next door neighbor and he said, "You know, I'm kind of scared. Will you accompany me?" He said, "Sure." So they saddled up the horse. The person who was in need of something riding the front and his neighbor the back, and they crossed, and good grief, nothing happened. They were almost inside of the next city, and he turned around to his neighbor and said, "You know, we have made it." And then he looked back again, and the ogre was his neighbor. So that is a bit of background, how we felt in that year of 1933 when the Nazis came to power. We believed that possibly Hitler would not last long, as all other German cabinets had not. And we also hoped that a better time would come. But on that evening, in 1933, January, 1933, my father, in a very solemn tone, which we were not very much used to, called my brother, who was 4 years younger than I. You have figured my age because you are good in mathematics. I was born in 1922. Called my brother and me into our best room in the apartment and said, I have to talk to you two boys. And he never talked in that decisive manner most of the time. And he said, I want you not to stick out. He who sticks out gets stuck. And then he said something else. He said, you know, I want you to be like invisible ink. He said, invisible ink disappears for a while, but you're not giving up. If the times change, invisible ink becomes visible again, and your personality can come out again. So he used that in a way. He also used a parable, and he told us that, and I must say his advice was a sword with a dual blade. Number one, it prevented us from exactly what he said, not to stick out. But on the other hand, it also was an inhibiting factor on our growth, on our personality, because you held yourself back, always keeping in mind that, that metaphor of invisible ink. And so when I wrote my
Okay, and actually, his autobiography is called Invisible Ink. And I think he said pretty clearly his neighbor turned out to be the ogre. So we're going to move on with Guy a little more and talk about from high school to Camp Ritchie. So Guy attended Soldan High School in St. Louis, and he started to come out of his shell. He joined the swimming team, and he became a reporter for the school newspaper. He even got the opportunity to interview clarinetist Benny Goodman, and that gave him the nickname Scoop. He attended a press conference with German novelist and Nobel Prize winner Thomas Mann. Since Mann's daughter, who was his interpreter, arrived late, Guy stepped in. And he not only interpreted Mann, but he also asked his own questions. So one of Guy's teachers was able to get him a part-time job in downtown St. Louis. And to save money on bus fare, he hitchhiked to and from work. He was constantly trying to get help from wealthy Americans to sponsor his family, just as his mother told him to do. He thought he was successful with a man who picked him up. However, the Jewish Aid Society rejected the application because the man was a professional gambler. It was absolutely preposterous to Guy, and pretty preposterous to me also, that the society was more concerned with what they put on that form than helping a Jewish family get out of Germany. Throughout his high school years, he was getting letters from his parents. He had to read between the lines because of German censorship. Guy graduated from high school in June 1939 and attended St. Louis University. Shortly after we entered the war, on December 7th, 1941, Guy saw a poster in the school hallway saying, "Naval Intelligence wants you." He went to sign up, but he got rejected by the Navy because they were only taking native-born Americans. It was about this time that he received a letter from his parents postmarked Warsaw. He couldn't understand how his family wound out in Poland. He then got a draft notice. Guy was thrilled to be able to join the military, as he wanted to go back to Germany and help his homeland get rid of Hitler and the Nazis. He was inducted at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas and then sent to Camp Barkley in Abilene, Texas for basic training and some medical training. During this time, he was sworn in as an American citizen and he legally changed his name to Guy Stern. After training was complete, he was expecting orders to a military hospital. Instead, he got top secret orders to report to Camp Ritchie in Maryland. Guy was among 130 graduates in his class, where he learned signal communications, staff duty, and counterintelligence. And so what we have here is we have two photos of Guy. I think the one in the middle in the sepia tone, I think that's as a brand new recruit. And down below, he's with two of his buddies. The one on the left is Guy Stern. And this is a training class on what they call order of battle, where they learn everything about the German army and military. So I want to show you a radio interview done with Guy.
Oh, here we are back here on Veterans Radio.
Yep.
And my guest today is Guy Stern. And let me tell you a little bit about Guy's background. During World War II, the United States formed an elite intelligence unit of mostly German Jewish academics at Camp Ritchie in Maryland. Their job was to devise ways to break the morale of the SS and the German troops that were captured. These men were also often credited with bringing an early end to the war. And one of those heroes is joining us right now, and that is Guy Stern, who is a distinguished professor emeritus of German literature and cultural history at Wayne State University. He is one of these Ritchie boys, and we're very fortunate today to have him back on Veterans Radio. So Guy, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back once more.
It's nice to have you again. As I mentioned when we were talking earlier, that the Ritchie boys were this group of soldiers and so forth that were almost all of them were from Europe at one point or another. You mentioned earlier that some of them were also Americans that were fluent in German and other languages. How did you get involved with them? And let me back up again real quickly. How did you get to America in the first place?
Okay, my parents, seeing the growing restrictions and chicanery against Jews in Germany, knew that we had to get out of there. So they intensified their correspondence with a relative of my mother's, her brother, who had been sort of exiled to the United States because he had been sassy to his father, my grandfather, and he was a patriarch. So if there was a rebel in the family, where did you send them to? To America. And I'm sure that some of my listeners' ancestry also had rebels in them.
So, but you weren't a rebel in your family, were you?
I was not a rebel at that.
I didn't think so. When did you arrive in the United States?
I arrived in 1937.
And you were how old at that time?
I was 15 years old.
Okay, so we've got you here now, and you continued living in the States, and you graduated high school in St. Louis, Missouri. Is that correct?
That is correct, and then entered St. Louis University.
Okay, and while you were at St. Louis University, the war broke out, Pearl Harbor. Then again, eventually, everybody was declaring war on everybody back and forth, and you decided to go down and enlist. How did that go?
Yes, the first step was I tried to enroll in naval intelligence,
which was trying to recruit people proficient in the languages of our enemies, and they found me competent, but they also deficient in one quality. I was not a native-born American. My accent betrayed me, so they said, no, we can't take you because we only take American-born soldiers. And then, however, the draft came and they apparently were less choosy and let me in.
But it wasn't the Navy, it was the Army, wasn't it?
I beg your pardon?
I said it wasn't the Navy this time, it was the Army that grabbed you.
It was the Army, and that it did not go quickly because several committees became involved. One German committee for German Jewry, and another one in the United States, of which I did not hear really until I was 90 years old, because they did not want to cause any they did not want to cause any clamor, because there were many elements in the United States, particularly in the State Department, that were not, they did not want to have a bunch of Jews coming over. Okay, so we're going to get back to Guy Stern next week. I left him at Fort Ritchie, and that's
Right.
where we're going to pick up. And now I want to talk about the second Ritchie boy, Stephen Louis. And here's some photos of Stephen Louis. The lower left, he's a pretty young boy there, a little older at the one on the right and the one above that. The upper left, that's his father in a tobacco shop, which was really more of a general store and tobacco shop. As I'm going to tell you, Stephen wound out in an orphanage, and the upper right is a photo from the orphanage of a few kids there, and the lower right are his parents. Yeah, the lower, of the four children, the one on the left is Stephen Louis. So Stephen was born in 1925 in Berlin. His mother, who was Protestant, struggled with rheumatic fever. She died at a very young age, leaving his father, Arthur, a widower. At age 7, Stephen was placed in the Baruch Auerbach orphanage for Jewish girls and boys because his father had no family and his mother's Protestant family would not take in a Jewish boy. It was the same institution where his father was raised. A year later, Hitler came to power. Stephen was visiting with his father every Sunday when he was told that those visits can no longer take place. He later found out that his father was detained at the Oranienburg concentration camp. And in those days, the concentration camp wasn't what we knew concentration camps as, death camps. This was really more of a prison. His father had a heart attack in 1935 and was released from the concentration camp and resumed his weekly visits with his son. But Stephen couldn't help notice the difference in his father. Several of his teeth were missing, and he looked very frail. During that detention, Stephen started going on Sundays with a friend's family for the weekly visits. And when his father was released, his father was invited also to join this family. And amazingly enough, his father married the hostess's sister, Joanna. And Joanna and Stephen grew very close. She was really the only mother he knew. With the Nazis in power, Stephen was no longer able to attend public school as he had been doing. The synagogue, which was in the orphanage, was trashed. Arthur and Joanna decided in 1938 they must get out of Germany. They were unsuccessful as a family, but they did manage to put Stephen on a train on July 4th, 1939. Keep in mind, he was 14 years old. He's being put on a train for what they hoped was a trip to France. From the train station in Berlin, Stephen's journey to the United States is a story within itself. He and 40 other Jewish German orphans arrived at a small French village about 20 miles south of Paris. Their new home was a chateau set up to handle German Jewish refugee children. It was run by a Paris-based Jewish Children's Aid Society. The chateau was already at maximum capacity, so the boys were put in an annex building. Stephen was placed in the local village school. Even though he was 14 years old, he didn't speak French, so he was placed in the first grade. Fortunately, he was a very quick learner in French, in math, and in geography, and soon he was advanced to his grade level. In May 1940, word arrived that the Germans were approaching Paris. The children and several instructors were loaded into trucks in an effort to reach safety. The group boarded a river barge where the boys were hidden in the coal bins below deck. At dawn, the barge docked at a small village to find food and water. Soon after eating, the boys heard gunfire and were hidden again below deck. German soldiers boarded the barge and found the boys hidden below. Fortunately, the soldiers didn't want to deal with the boys, so they decided to leave them alone. The instructors decided traffic on the river was too heavy and were afraid of getting caught in a battle between the Germans and the French. They felt it best to return to the chateau some 20 miles away by walking. The group came across a French checkpoint that was wary of these German children. But when they were told the children were German Jewish refugees, they were allowed to pass. They then encountered a German parachuter that was shot and killed as soon as he landed. The boys witnessed constant bombings and firefights. They saw a French plane shot down by anti-aircraft guns. After 2 days, they finally reached the chateau, which they discovered was now German occupied. They were told they had to work for the soldiers or be sent back to Germany. Well, of course, that's a no-brainer. They chose to work. Stephen was sent to do their laundry. 2 weeks later, France and Germany signed an armistice where the Germans controlled northern France, Normandy and Paris, and the Free French controlled the southern part centered in Vichy. Several weeks later, the boys were awakened in the middle of the night for a journey to the south of France. They were transported to a chateau in the village of Chabannes. Their time at the chateau was much better. They had food, schooling, played sports, and learned a trade at the art school. And this gives me an opportunity to talk a little about Nadine. When we lived in Oceanside in Long Island, Nadine was extremely active in the Women's American Art Chapter in Oceanside. She eventually became president of the chapter for a few years. So it's nice to see that our work is with a good organization. So Stephen became an expert leather worker. But unfortunately, at this time, the Vichy government became supporters of Hitler's Germany. Anti-Semitic laws were passed, and Jewish French citizens were being deported. 1 year after Stephen arrived at the chateau, he was summoned to the director's office. And listen to this news that he got in the director's office. He was absolutely elated to learn that his parents were able to leave Germany, and with an affidavit from Joanna's cousin in America, they made their journey to America. And let's watch now a short video of Stephen. And this is an interview with the Shower organization, the organization that is trying to archive Holocaust survivors.
Basically, we were safe in this place, and this was way out in the country, and we had, of course, a lot of farming to be done, and taking care of our own quarters, and stealing food, and going out at night to steal food and wood.
Describe the food situation.
The food situation was very basic. We had some bread which was made partially from sawdust and partially from wheat. So it's interesting to pull splinters out of a slice of bread. We had a diet for 9 months of turnips. Turnips for lunch with potatoes, and for dinner we had potatoes with turnips. And once a week we had one small piece of meat, like a cube from a piece of a beef stew meal, a small cube of meat.
Were you aware of the reason for this?
Was that what?
Aware of the reason that you were
No, except we knew there was a war on, and the shortages existed, and knowing from Germany, we had rationing since 1936. But we supplemented our diet by going out at night. We used to steal apples and steal carrots, we got in the fields and of the farmers,
Can you describe one of these forays?
Well, you go out at night, and you have big bags, and you fill them up with food, and then hopefully on the way back the farmer doesn't see you and tries to shoot you with a BB gun, to chase you away, and which happened a couple of times.
You want to describe that?
Well, when you hear a gun shooting, you run like hell, and try to get back and not get caught on it. And but they knew we were doing it, but they really didn't do an excessive amount of watching or guarding it. And
the they being the farmers or your
yeah.
caregivers?
No, the farmers. Our caregivers just turn the other way, and but it helped us to sustain ourselves.
I love his description. For lunch, they had
basic
turnips with potatoes, and for dinner, they had potatoes with turnips. A very diversified meal. All right, so Stephen's parents were working as domestics in Boston, and they helped get the documents to bring Stephen to America. So his journey is not over yet. In April 1942, Stephen took a train to Lyon, where he picked up his visa at the U.S. consul office. He then traveled by train to Marseille, where he boarded a passenger ship. The ship stayed close to shore to avoid German U-boats and landed in Rabat, Morocco. Stephen then took a bus to Casablanca and waited several weeks before boarding the Portuguese steamship Serpa Pinto. The ship was chartered by the U.S. agency Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. It was a very arduous journey. They felt relatively safe since the ship was flying a Portuguese flag, which was a neutral country. There was one incident of Germans boarding the ship, looking for contraband and looking at passports. Miraculously, on June 25th, 1942, the ship arrived in New York Harbor. Seeing the Statue of Liberty was probably the best moment in young Stephen's life. However, a few minutes later, even that was surpassed when his parents greeted him after Stephen disembarked. they were finally reunited as a family. And let's watch another video, Stephen. This one is done at the Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Minnesota.
I should go fast forward.
Yeah, we can get past the.
And I live in Manchester, New Hampshire. Today is July 1st, 2008. I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1925.
Please,
And I come from a mixed marriage. My father was Jewish and my mother was Protestant. And when I was 6 years old, which was before Hitler came, my mother died from an illness.
Somebody is not muted and it's really interrupting. Please mute yourself.
can you please mute yourself? Somebody is not muted.
And my father had no way of...
Sandra, your iPhone is showing that you're talking. I'd appreciate it if you could please mute yourself.
It's
We
very
hear you.
disruptive.
taking care of me since he was running a business which he still owned before Hitler took it away from him. And the relatives on my mother's side, the Gentile relatives, refused to take care of me simply because I was Jewish, and they wanted to have nothing to do with a Jew at that point in time. So my father put me into an orphanage located in Berlin, and ironically, it's the same orphanage that he was in 1902. So he was also he was a total orphan in 1902. He had lost 7 brothers and sisters, and also his parents at that time. And in this orphanage, we lived what was for the time being a fairly normal life. We went to a public school in Germany, which was mixed with Gentile kids. And the upbringing in...
Let's see if we can silence Sandra. Let's see if we can do that.
No, I'd have to go out. Annette, can you please silence Sandra's iPhone? Sandra.
The orphanage was similar to what it was in the school system. In Germany, the school system was very, very strict. The teachers used a lot of physical beatings to keep us in line. If we had more than 5 mistakes in our spelling test, we used to get a beating. And then if we, of course, fell asleep during a class, they did the same thing. And I would say that all of my teachers probably would be in jail today for mistreating children. And this went on, and then of course Hitler came to power, and Hitler started the purification process. And in this process, what happened in our school, which was a mixed school, as I said, one day a Nazi officer, a doctor, and a nurse came into the classroom, and the 52 kids were segregated. The Jewish kids were put into one corner of the classroom, and all the other kids had to sit in a circle. And each one of them, of the Gentile kids, was called forward, and the nurse had a measuring device to determine the color of their hair, the color of the skin, color of the eyes, the doctor had a medical instrument whereby he measured the shape of the head, the shape of the nose, then also the entire head in itself, to determine which features would best fit into the Aryan program which Hitler had outlined for all the Germans to adhere to. And also what the German government did, if there were families who had a genetic defect that could be carried forward into future generations, what they did in each Jewish family, and even the Gentile families, they all the people in the family that could still bear children were operated on so that they could no longer have children and bring forward the genetic defects into future generations.
You're evil. So Stephen joined his parents in Boston. He spoke no English upon arrival. He signed up to take classes in night school and was fluent in English within 1 year. On his 18th birthday, the very first day he was eligible, Stephen registered for the draft. 5 months later, in September 1943, he was inducted into the United States Army. Like Guy Stern, he did his basic training in the medical corps. He too received orders for Camp Ritchie. It almost made him feel that he was back in Berlin, being in a unit with so many German Jewish refugees. Shortly after arrival at Camp Ritchie, Stephen and some of his fellow soldiers appeared before a federal magistrate and was sworn in as American citizens. He wrote to his parents in Boston, "I am no longer stateless." At Camp Ritchie, Stephen graduated first as a French interpreter. Then he did a 4-week class called Order of Battle, which taught him about the structure of the German army. And here we see a young recruit in the lower right, Stephen Louis, and with a buddy in the Jeep in the lower left. The shot on the upper left, that is from the Chaban Chateau. And the one in the upper middle is also from there, where he's working in the kitchen. He was 16 years old at the time. So let's move on with, so that's it on Stephen. And I'm going to get back to him next week. And now let's talk about Manfred Steinfeld. So Manfred was born in 1924 in Josbach, Germany. His parents, Abraham and Paula, had a dry goods store in town. Abraham and his 2 brothers both fought in World War I, where Abraham's brother Isidore lost his life. There was a stone memorial honoring Isidore in the Josbach town square. Manfred's father died from pneumonia, leaving Paula to care for Irma, age 6, Manfred, age 5, and Herbert, age 3. So in the photo on the left, Manfred is the child on the right, Herbert is the brother in the middle, and Irma, the sister, is on the left. And it's grandma, and I'm not sure if it's an aunt or a friend in that shot. They lived with Abraham's family, so Paula got a lot of help raising the children from Abraham's mother. There were only 6 Jewish families in Josbach, all related. Josbach is located 60 miles from the big city of Frankfurt. The schoolhouse consisted of 2 rooms, grades 1 through 4 in one room and grades 5 through 8 in the other room. Of the 70 students in the school, 10 were Jewish. Manfred, being the man of the house, was matured beyond his years. He was a good student. He helped harvest apples and plums and he would make deliveries by bicycle for the store. His grandmother died in 1933, about the same time that the Nazis came to power. Anti-Semitic acts kept increasing in the school and at the dry goods store. A group of Hitler youth, many of them former friends of Manfred, went through town throwing stones through the Jewish store windows. In 1937, Paula decided she needed to get her family out of Germany. Unable to get a travel visa for the family, she was able to hook Manfred up with the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Their mission was to help unaccompanied children under the age of 16 out of Germany. After the society agreed to help Manfred leave Germany, more work was required for a scheduled departure. He needed 5 copies of his visa application, 2 copies of his birth certificate, a certificate of good conduct from German authorities, and this was getting more and more difficult to obtain for Jewish children. He needed proof of good health and an affidavit from Paula's sister and brother-in-law, Morris and Minna Rosenbusch, who were living in Chicago. In June 1938, his US visa was finally approved for a July 1938 departure date. German Jews leaving for America were allowed a limited amount of cash to take with them. When he said goodbye to one of his uncles, he was given a US $10 bill. His uncle said, to help you start a new life in America. Paula sewed the bill into his pants cuff. His mother also purchased 2 very expensive camera lenses, which she was able to hide in talcum powder cans. She told her son to sell them in America when he needed money. On the day of his departure, his sister and brother and other relatives came to see him off. His younger brother, Herbert, absolutely idolized Manfred. It was a brutal goodbye. Manfred and his mother biked to the rail station in Halsdorf, where they caught a train to Kirchhain. It was there where Manfred had to say goodbye to his mother. She bought him a one-way ticket to Hamburg, and his mother gave him a white handkerchief and told him to wave it in his right hand when he got to Hamburg. His escort would also be waving a white handkerchief in her right hand, so he knew it was safe to go with her. Both Manfred and his mom tried to stay strong, knowing they might never see each other again. Manfred begins his journey as a 14-year-old, while Paula heads back home to figure out how to save her other 2 children. His escort met him as planned in Hamburg. He spent the night in her apartment, and the next morning, she took him and 12 other Jewish refugee children to board the SS New York, and that is the ship in the lower right-hand corner on this slide. They had bunk beds, and Manfred shared a 3rd-class cabin in steerage with another boy his age. They had bunk beds and a bathroom in the hall. They were given their meals in the 3rd-class dining room. Heeding his mother's warning not to draw attention to himself, he pretty much stayed in his cabin except for meal times during the 11 days at sea. The fact that practically all the passengers and crew were German, Manfred did not speak to them. He was very afraid of not seeing his family again and wondering what his life would be like in this new country. When the ship docked in New York Harbor, an agency representative met the children and gave them name tags around their necks. Only Manfred and another boy were going to Chicago. They were taken to Grand Central Station, given box lunches, and put on a train that arrived in Chicago the next day. Aunt Minna met him the next day at the station in Chicago. He was overwhelmed by the hustle bustle of the big city. Picture yourself, 14 years old in a small village in Germany, now walking the streets of Chicago as 14 years old. His aunt was warm and welcoming, but his uncle was not so happy to have him. He lived with a family of 8 who were struggling to make ends meet. For the next 4 years, Manfred slept on the living room sofa. Manfred did well at Hyde Park High School and had many Jewish friends, and took on the Americanized version of his name, Manny. And we're going to watch a video now of Manny Stern. So this is many years later, and he is going back to Yosbach. I think this takes place in the 1990s. So start at 6:07 AD. Okay.
Knowing only the basic facts about the fate of those he left behind, Manfred had no idea what he was about to uncover as he set out to take a new look at his life. A life in which he's been both victim and victor.
Wait till you come to the sign where we make a left turn here. Right here, see it? This is the town I was born in. This is the metropolis where I was born, my birthplace. This town is the typical small town that you find throughout this part of Germany. Can you imagine this town being 800 years old? It's hard to believe.
Manfred has many memories from his boyhood in Yosbach during the early 1930s.
One of the pleasant memories I had, we used to pick apples, we used to pick plums. And the first money I've ever earned was picking blueberries and selling the blueberries by the quart. Wo wohnt der Henkel?
Manfred is going to meet one of his old childhood friends, Hans Henkel, whom he hasn't seen for many years.
He lives here.
He's not sure of what kind of reception he'll receive.
Hello.
Hello.
Hans.
Hello.
I'm late.
Herzlich willkommen in
I'm
Josbach.
late.
Herzlich willkommen in Josbach.
Hello.
A warm welcome greets Manfred, and inside are others waiting to reminisce about the old times.
Erst Heinrich Buxheim.
Oh, Heinrich Buxheim. Aber dein Vater hat doch auch in Amerika gewohnt.
Ja, ist in Amerika geboren.
Yeah. Well, Herman, how are you?
See you. I'm fine. How are you?
Okay.
A pleasant surprise for Manfred is seeing Hans's son, Herman. Herman had worked for Manfred's furniture company several years back in the United States.
You came from Kassel?
Mach mal einen Vorschlag.
Ja. Hier sind noch Bilder. Das Herbert und Irmchen und da war es Madakaten.
Das ist die Irmchen, das ist Malakaten.
Oh, das ist ein schönes Buch.
Das kriegst du von uns mit.
Okay.
Gell?
Here's my mother, my sister,
Aber wo bist du dann? Wo ist dein Kassel?
me, my brother, my grandmother. So we're recognized in the 800th anniversary of this town.
As far back as the late 1700s, 2 large Jewish families, the Steinfelds and Kattens, settled in several small villages in the Hessen region of Germany, near Frankfurt. Throughout the centuries, the families kept in close contact, celebrating religious holidays and family events together. Manfred's mother, Paula Katten, was born in 900-year-old Rauschenberg, while Manfred's father, Adolf Steinfeld, was born and raised in Josbach. Adolf Steinfeld died of pneumonia when Manfred was just a young boy. Walking the streets of Josbach, Manfred well remembers how the town was then.
I mean, there were 6 Jewish families in this town. 3 Cuttons and 3 Steinfelds. And this house was owned by Pearlman Cutton, and this one was Sally Cutton. There was a matzah bakery in town. They served the whole province of Hesse, and originally owned by Steinfelds. There was 3 Steinfelds from this town who were killed in World War I. Any Cuttons killed?
Cutten ist keiner drauf.
Nein. Die Cuttons waren Rauschenberg und Halsdorf.
Levi Steinfeld, Sally Steinfeld, Isidor Steinfeld, Leura.
Yeah.
Manfred arrives at the home he was born in.
Yeah, so there were 3 Steinfelds killed in World War I, and so many German Jews, when Hitler first came to power, they weren't worried. They were Germans. They fought in the
75.
war. They didn't think they would have any issues whatsoever. So going back to Manny's story, on a Sunday morning, Manny was doing his homework and listening to the Chicago Bears game on the radio when the broadcast was interrupted with the bulletin that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. 2 days later, when Germany declared war on the United States, Manny's concern about his mother, brother, and sister were greatly intensified. The last he heard from his mother was a letter saying they were going to be deported to the Lutz ghetto. He determined the best thing he could do for them was to join the U.S. Army and help his new country defeat his homeland. He decided to wait to be drafted. He enrolled in the University of Illinois, intending to remain in school until drafted. Manny got his wish early in 1943. Basic training was at Camp Roberts in California. He did well on intelligence and aptitude tests and was therefore selected for the Army Specialized Training Program. He was sent to City College in New York, where he studied engineering, foreign languages, including Russian, and medicine to meet the wartime needs. On November 15th, 1943, he became a US citizen, which was something he was dreaming about ever since he viewed the Statue of Liberty. By December 1943, there were 150,000 students in this program taking courses at college. They were soldiers, but they were also students. There was much criticism that the boys were in college rather than in combat. A few months later, that was corrected, and 100,000 of these student soldiers were being transferred to regular Army units. Most were sent to conventional fighting forces. Manny, because of his fluency in Germany, went directly to Camp Ritchie. He graduated April 1944 in the 17th class at Camp Ritchie. Manny was trained as a German language interrogator. He then did the 4 weeks class in order of battle, which again covered the German Army organization and the German war strategy. He was promoted to staff sergeant. So it's 20 to 9, and I think I'm going to hold off Camp Ritchie until the beginning of next week. And I think we'll stop sharing at this point, and we'll take any questions, comments. But these were 3 amazing young men. And when you hear how their lives turned out, I think you're going to be totally in awe of these 3 guys, which we'll talk about next week. So what's going on, Annette?
Okay, well, we have a question from Margot that was answered by Larry. Margot's question was, of all the Ritchie boys, why did you choose to concentrate on these 3 men? And Larry said, we'll introduce a few more. Their contributions were particularly noteworthy and had significant impact. There is also much written about them and firsthand video.
Yeah, that is true. So I read the book called Sons and Soldiers, right here. And I really got inspired by reading this book, and much of my, this is probably my main source for information, but this book focuses on 5 Ritchie boys. And because of the time strain, I cut it down to the 3, which I think will fit in perfect on the 2.5, 3 hours that I have. But I'm sure all 15,000 of these Ritchie boys had a story to tell. Maybe all a little different. You know, I was talking to Jeffrey Leiter about his father and uncle. I was talking to Ken Kalfer about his father, who wasn't a Ritchie boy, but he did interrogation. So there's loads of these stories around. Anything else?
Would you like, do you want me to give you just a couple of seconds about my dad?
Sure, yeah, I'd appreciate that. Go right ahead.
He was a little older than the people you have discussed. He was born in 1914 in Munich, so a big city. After the Kristallnacht in November 1938, he was arrested by the SS and imprisoned at Dachau, which is, you know, the concentration camp. It's actually in a suburb of Munich. And he was there for 6 weeks. And then he got a visa to come to the United States and was released and arrived with his mother in New York on his birthday, his 25th birthday in 1939. And in 1943, he was drafted, did his basic training at Camp Lee in Virginia, and then got orders to go to Camp Ritchie, where he was trained like these other specialized soldiers. He served his time in the military in London, where using captured documents, he refined the order of battle that you've been talking about, that was used you know, in many, many ways by the US military to understand the structure of the German army, including in great detail that helped the interrogators like my uncle in interrogating German soldiers to convince the soldiers that they knew everything about the German army and there was no point in resisting the interrogation.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
my father died, he died in 1979.
He was quite young. You said he was born in 1914?
14. He died when he was 60.
Yeah. All 3 of the guys that I'm talking about, and I'll give you next week, but they all lived a pretty long life. And one of them is still, Guy Stern is still out and kicking around. So it's pretty amazing. Nadine and I watched the other day something on, I think it was on Amazon Prime, and it was called Confidential Camp. And when I saw the blurb on it, I thought it was Ritchie Boys, but it wasn't Ritchie Boys, but it was definitely related. It dealt with Americans who were dealing with the scientists that came out of Germany, including von Braun. So it was to get all the rocket information. And if you get a chance, it was only a half-hour show. It's on Prime, Confidential Camp, and it's actually done in animation with a few live interviews. But it's a really an interesting story along these lines. It's related. What else we got, Annette?
Wait, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
We do not have any other questions.
I would offer a question.
Yes.
Ken's and my dad were left Germany in 1937. He returned in the American Army and was a translator. And when we went to search for information later, he was not a Ritchie boy, but when we went to learn more later, we were informed that any of the military records were destroyed in ironically in a fire at the warehouse military archives in St. Louis. So the relationship with the St. Louis is another family issue. But what I'm interested in finding out is how any of the other records from Jewish German soldiers who were in the American Army after having left Germany and come to this country, and they became translators, interpreters, fighters, etc. for the Americans. If there were unit records that survived outside of that fire in St. Louis, or survived in other formats that would tell us more about Martin Kaufer and his service in the American Army in World War II.
Unfortunately, Mike, I don't have an exact answer for you, but I think just about all these stories are archived by the people themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if they somehow made an historical record of what they did, and as you saw by the videos I showed, Manny, Guy, and Stephen, they were very vocal with their work. And I think, I don't know, I happen to, I think at one point I was looking for my discharge papers, and I think I came across the same story, that there was a fire in Philadelphia, and because I was in the service during Vietnam years and years after that. So I don't even know when the fire was, but I was able to get a copy of my discharge. That's really what I wanted, was a copy of my discharge. And I was able to get, I don't remember how, who I wrote to, but yeah, that fire, I think, took away a lot of stuff. It really did. And then keep in mind that this training and what they did, it was top secret. So it wasn't released, I think, until the early 1990s that they actually were allowed to even talk about it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, good luck.
I just an aside for your viewers and listeners, last December, I achieved the restoration of our family's German citizenship. And traveling to Europe last summer in the middle of the pandemic, we got into Europe because of that citizenship in Amsterdam, when they checked our papers and our immunization. Germany finally came to our rescue.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. You know, it reminds me of, I met a lady about 2 years ago, and she is Spanish heritage. And it turns out that she learned very recently that she has some Jewish blood in her. And she did some research and found out that her family was kicked out of Spain during the Inquisition. And she actually was able to get Spanish citizenship years and years and years later, and she never, she's not, might be 12th, 15th generation. You're talking 1400s to now, so kind of a related story, where that citizenship is still there. So if we have nothing more, so next week, I'm going to continue this story. I will talk about the time at Camp Ritchie, but more importantly, I will talk about these three guys and what they did during the war, immediately after the war, like when I say after the war, even when the war was still on, but after treaty was signed, they're still in Germany, so what happened with them, and then their life that they led since that time, which is kind of amazing. So I thank you all. This has been great attendance. Thank you, Annette, for hosting. Thank you, my visitors, Mike and where's your sister, Jeffrey? She's still, yeah, Susan, yeah. Thank you for joining us. And hopefully I'll see you all next week, same time, same station. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. I will, just a second. I want to give this back to you. I can end this.